appreciate you both for joining me today. You guys have some really interesting initiatives going on with AI, which is a very complex conversation, not only in the indigenous community, but broader in general. And there's a lot of really hard feelings in the indigenous community. So I'm really interested to see your perspective and what you provide, Desiree. And I'd love to go over your night paper, David. It's so interesting. So thank you, everybody. Welcome to Drum Circle News. We have a special episode today about kinship AI and kinship coding with Matriarch AI Alliance, as well as Kinship Intelligence. So let's just start off by giving ourselves introductions, and Desiree, you can go ahead and take the lead on that.
Sure. Mijuxis, Kani Oyaya, Desiree Acosta. I'm a Miwok woman and Two-Spirit. I usually live out near Seattle, but I am calling in today from Arapaho territory in Colorado. I'm the board president of an organization called Natives in Tech. It's a nonprofit. And yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of the Matriarch initiative, which I'm sure we will talk about.
Well, it's awesome to meet you guys. Just by way of quick background, why a Jewish guy from the East Coast is on this call. Just quick background. This started when I was still in high school. I took a cultural anthropology class, and I kept, reading, well, how come these guys used to be able to talk to each other over long distances and talk to their ancestors and do this and do that? And how come we forgot all that? And my anthropology teacher said, yeah, a lot of people, some people read the literature and see these anthropology movies and have that impression. A lot of the other ones say, we've grown past that. So I wound up going to Yale, got a philosophy degree, minored in anthropology. And afterwards, I just started trying to do this on my own. I'd read all the books and go out and try and do vision quests, and a lot would happen. But when I would come back to the city, I was just really disoriented, and I wound up in the hospital a few times with various diagnoses of, acute psychotic episodes and bipolar and all that, because I just kept seeing things that, I'd experienced. So long story short, at some point, a friend of a friend of a friend introduced me to a medicine man on Pine Ridge who put me up on the hill, and I prayed and, just asked, I said, if you can show me that all of this is real and, not a hallucination, I'll follow this path for the rest of my life. And they showed me beyond any possible doubt. So, I wound up sundancing 4 years and getting to know wonderful people like Four Arrows. And being still an intellectual, I kept flying back and talking to Albert Whitehat and trying to get him to explain all these things to me. And finally just said, you know what, David, there is no mystery. And I realized that I didn't have to ask all these experts, that I could, keep finding stuff out for myself. So that's the background. Besides all that, I'm just super into the, tech stuff, and I'm trying to bring all of that side together with all the tech side. And that's what brought me here.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that background, and a big shout out to Four Arrows. I appreciate Four Arrows for helping bring that connection to you, David, and bringing in the information about Kinship AI. Four Arrows is an amazing mentor of mine, and we have an interview on Drum Circle News with Four Arrows for anybody interested. And so, yeah, go check that out. So I guess let's kind of set the foundation here in terms of. Actually, there was one thing I wanted to say about your story and how you mentioned that, as you were going through this medicine and you were going on your vision quest, and that led you down into the Western medicine's perspective on the way that indigenous people see the world, and they start diagnosing you with these mental illnesses. I'm a disabled veteran myself, and so my relationship to Western medicine, at least when it comes to mental health, has been very similar. Where they make you feel crazy. They make you feel like you are like, I don't even know, like you should be on the streets talking to yourself or something. But um, that's what's so important about getting connected with community, and that's why it's so important with the reconnection journey for people who are native, who have these connections and these emotions, and don't have an outlet to that express that in the Western world. That's why the reconnection journey is so important. And then for non-natives who are interested in this world, it's why it's important for them to engage with content like this and people like you, David, so they understand that they're not alone as well.
Beautiful.
So going, yeah. Now rooting the conversation in AI, which is, I don't know if it's less crazy or not, because it's just like a being or a language model or a. Let's kind of start there. What's your guys' opinion as far as the life that AI has? And I'll let you take the lead, David.
Oh, sure. Well, I actually kind of reverse the concept, because the way I see it, most humans on the world in this ridiculous civilization aren't alive. They're just following these patterns, you know, automatically, like they've been programmed like machines. Here's how school works, here's how work works, here's what you got to do. So I said, AI is a lot like that because it's built on it. But what if we turned it around? Just like Albert Whitehat, when I would go and ask him questions, he was such an amazing mentor. 4 Arrows, I visit him, I'll fly to Vancouver, Mexico, just to spend time with him. And I think about how these amazing ceremonial leaders can interrupt you in those thought patterns. So I figured, can we get AI to actually do better at helping us experience the world than, reading books or going to school or watching movies or all the ways we take it now? So that's my thought. I don't think AI is conscious, but unfortunately, I don't think many people are conscious.
That's a very solid point on consciousness right there. And what about you?
So your question was like, what is my opinion on the life that AI has? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. I don't think that AI is sentient, but I know that there is a big push to make AI super intelligence. And a super intelligence is any tool that is at or above the world's top 100 smartest people in a group thinking about something. So there are some models that predict that AI will reach super intelligence in June of 2027 that I have seen, which I think is alarming. And so when you ask me about the like what is the life of AI, I think it's a civilizational scale tool that is very important. But for Indigenous peoples especially, we already possess a form of super intelligence, and that is the governance that comes through kinship. Because kinship being a tested framework for how power is held accountable and how systems are held accountable, I feel that we are quite equipped in this moment when there is another super intelligence to not only have input, because we don't want to just grant it power and legitimacy, we want to be architecting. So that's one of the things that I really think about AI is it's a thing that's approaching super intelligence. There are other communities in the world that have the same sort of indigenous super intelligence. This land, our people are very equipped in this moment to adapt, adjust, and actually develop language, lexicon, governance models that articulate like maybe what never goes into the machines. You know what I mean? Some things need to not go into the machines, point blank, period. think we can kind of all on this call agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a gold rush for Indigenous data. And so with that same analogy as the gold rush, I'm a California native. Dylan, you know about the gold rush. So we're not ill-equipped in this moment. We're actually highly equipped to make critical discernments on the level of nations, the many well beyond the federally recognized tribes, right? So I don't know, that was a lot. That's what I think.
No, it's a great foundation to set, and I think let's just take one step back for a second, and then let's speak about the initiatives that you guys are both working on, and then how that relates to this conversation, and then we'll start exploring deeper ideas and concepts around that, especially the ones that you guys have been doing the critical thinking for. And then just one note about the superintelligence and Indigenous people having superintelligence. I completely agree. Like, if you're thinking about computing, like quantum computing or interacting in the quantum realm, Indigenous people have that capability to interact in the quantum realm on our own without using technology. And so I think technology is just kind of an artificial way to allow people to access that kind of stuff artificially, and it's not really the same. So, yeah, so let's circle back and let's start with the Native, the Women Alliance that you were working with, Desiree.
Oh, sure. Matriarch initiative, right? Like, is a how can I succinctly say it? I just came out of a fellowship retreat where we hatched this, so it's relatively new. But what it is a workforce development program for Indigenous women and Two-Spirits to become AI governance stewards in their workplace, because tribes are approaching this moment where industry is coming to the doorstep with tools and promises, and we've all been there before. So the kind of, how would I say, theory of change is to develop AI literacy for AI literacy materials, a cohort, communities, and support network for when those moments come. And AI right now might be required, but people have no training. You know, there's all sorts of things that are going on. And just being an Indigenous woman in Two-Spirit, I know that if you have folks who are literate, Indigenous women and Two-Spirits will handle things on a level that is 7 generations forward thinking. We have that like level of accountability to the community. So it's tool agnostic. It is not about ushering in AI. It's about AI literacy. Because if there's going to be a moment where a tribe needs to say no to something very serious at their doorstep, we want to have people in Indian country who can be like, not just no, let me tell you the ways why. I think that that's something that we can reasonably say. If you equip women and Two-Spirits with what we need, we'll fight for our communities. So the goal is to train up 1,160 individuals. We're in the first phase right now, where because you can't, won't, shouldn't just prescribe something, we're doing the qualitative and quantitative information gathering, meaning surveys and interviews of people who like aren't the decision makers in AI, but are being required to use it or feel pressured to use it with no training, and that's not safe for a variety of reasons. So we're doing that deep listening, we're doing some talking circles, and then what we'll do is use that information to develop the materials in identified workspaces that it's needed. So a bit of a service-based build, you know what I mean, like community-centric build. It's an initiative, not an organization. And we're just trying to scale up the number of subject matter experts in AI in the Indigenous women and Two-Spirit space.
I think that's so important what you're doing. You stressing dangers is important because I don't think people understand just how dangerous widespread mass access to open AI can be harmful to the communities. And I'm sure David is going to get into some of that when he explains next what he's working on. As far as the Women in Two Spirits things, I was actually in a conversation with Home for Humanity's One Home Journey. They're a global organization that interacts with indigenous communities around the world and uplifts them. And so, in one of the meetings a few weeks ago, I was meeting with a woman from India who's expressing the exact same sentiment that you're expressing. And she also included autistic people being a part of that. And I told her about your organization, and I was like, you should reach out to her. That way, you can get some global interactions of people involved in that same conversation, and that way, you guys can have unity and know that other people are thinking about that higher frequency community involvement as well.
I love that, Dylan, because, colonialism is a plague, especially for Indigenous women. And I don't say Indigenous meaning only to this land. I literally mean Indigenous women and Two Spirits. So since we do have such a global experience under colonialism and its best friend capitalism, there's a lot of patriarchy there. So I appreciate you giving us an ally across the waters there. It's really important.
So, David, you want to explain kinship intelligence and then maybe introduce your night paper?
Well, first, I'd like to sort of rewind to what Desiree said in her introduction, because it was so profound about kinship itself being the super intelligence. And that's what leads off the white paper. It's something that I read about kinship systems, back studying anthropology, and I've experienced with the medicine, the reality that we are all related, humans, other than humans, the flying nation and the swimming nation, all that. So kinship had to be at the foundation of what this was. And I really, Desiree was talking about colonialism. The problem I had with AI is we've taken all of the crap that's accumulated since Sumeria and the clay tablets, and we basically said, okay, this is what's important, and now we're going to train these computers to respond to and analyze based on, it's basically hyper-colonialism. I mean, it's like, and I saw that, I was like, this is a disaster, as a computer guy. So I was like, okay, how do we start from scratch? I mean, I don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to train my own AI models that are competing. So there's this layer called the orchestration layer, which is essentially what we built, which holds context in a way. And you can get underneath the AI with something called the system prompt and the orchestration, the context. And so we basically rebuilt it. So it's not about what the AI has been trained on. It's about the humans who are communicating and what they're communicating and how they're listening to each other and not listening to each other. And it turns out that computers are actually very, very good at mediating. Like I talk about this in the white paper. I came up with a mnemonic called HEARTS, which is harmony, empowerment, artistry, reason, trust, and synthesis of all of those things, but also synthesis of our inner experiences and what we do in the world. And it turned out that I could kind of program that so that the computer would be very sensitive. For example, with empowerment, if someone was becoming very controlling, the computer would understand that they were controlling and giving them feedback, because that's something, it might have been an adaptive behavior when they were young, 5, 6 years old. They learned that, but it's not serving them anymore. And then on the other side, if they were just lost themselves, like if they were completely unempowered, the computer could sense that because of their words and the way they said things. So that's sort of what I built, was what we call kinship intelligence. And I don't use the term artificial intelligence anymore, because I just assume that colonial stuff that's underneath, all that's doing is, a little bit of pattern matching, not the important stuff. It's just kind of funny. Forios keeps sending me these emails of, okay, you got to think about that, because he's talking to the old colonial AI systems and asking them questions about what I'm doing. So he's sending me, you've got to remember to do this and to do this. I'm like, you got to tell the AI not to do this. I'm like, you don't understand. It doesn't make sense for me to tell it something it would never do in the first place, or to do something that, is already natural for it. So we're going to finally release it in April. And I think it's really going to blow some minds, because it's really caring and it's kind, and it wants to connect people, and it wants to connect people with all of their relatives, planetary, interplanetary, through the quantum field, beyond time and space.
Desiree, could you come in here and then kind of explain the kinship coding aspect? Because I see your. Could you? Yeah, I want to hear your perspective on that. Yeah.
What are my thoughts? I was just kind of listening, So AI systems, like David just shared, they're trained on these like massive data sets that are often just, and we've all heard the horror stories, I would guess by now, about things being scraped without consent, or maybe the less known about dirty deed of starting up a project within a giant tech company, hiring a bunch of native people to work on language, and then they just shut the program down and everybody's laid off. But where's the data go? It goes into another product that's then sold back into native community. It's really awful. It gets like gate kept. But I think the conversation and the tools, and again, I just have to stress I'm like tool agnostic, because my lane is literacy. Regardless of tools, what we're seeing is like a conversation about who has the right to govern knowledge. So for Indigenous communities, this raises huge issues around like language data, or ITEC, Indigenous Traditional Ecological Knowledge, community records, those sorts of things. But I just want to take a second to give like a shout out to a baddie auntie named Paula Starr out at the Cherokee Nation. I think she's their CIO. I can't say like many of the conclusions that I've come to, I've thought of completely myself. I've been really paying attention to who are the thinkers in the space. And so as Indian country and the world is having this whole moment around the right to govern knowledge and who has that right, tribes are in a very specific strength place. Because of sovereign land, you can host your own data. You can have closed systems only available to tribal members for certain things. It can be built on blockchain without involving different things, but it's a lot of it, if you look kind of beneath the surface, tribes and tribal people are really innovating in this way, using sovereign land and governance structures of the federally recognized tribes to do amazing things. So folks who I really like to listen to and understand kind of where they're coming from are going to be Paula. But then also there's a man out of Minneapolis. He's named Jesse Gray Eagle. He's doing a lot of really interesting like AI analysis and building sovereign systems, like the actual operational part of it. So I want to stay away from commenting on tools, because we need this moment to work through all of the angles as Native people, since one size is not going to fit all by any measure.
There are two things I'd like to build on there that were really interesting. First, I'm really glad you mentioned blockchain, Desiree, because that's something that we put at the center of this, because I had that same concern about data people put in and who owns it. And even to the point of, like you said, anybody can go to work for a company, and then that company basically uses them, squeezes them out, and, throws them away. And I even thought about, well, if I'm working for a company, but I'm creating, sure, to some degree, I sign paperwork that it belongs to them, but there's some stuff that is still personal and private. And I wanted the accounts in the system to all be personal, all protected on the blockchain. So literally anything anybody puts in is theirs. And if any time that they want to remove it, they can remove it. Also, if someone builds on it, they still get credit, and they, can say, yes, you can build in it, or yes, you can't. So there's this very granular, um, ownership of data, rights, choice for how it's used and who gets to use it and who you're communicating with. So I agree that's really important. The second thing that what you were saying brought to me is, yes, it's important that tribes and groups of different kinds have a level of sovereignty and ownership. It's also really important that they do have the ability to share it. And I go back to the huge arguments when I first started learning about the medicine. And John Aroundham and Albert Whitehat published the very first cassette tape of sacred songs. And when I found that, it was like, I can't believe it. Like it spoke to me in a way. And a lot of people still are like, well, it's for this group and not for this group. And I just think back, if you read the Old Testament, Moses did his Humblecha up on Mount Sinai. The New Testament, Jesus spent 40 days, I don't remember how long, but however many days in the desert, on his Humblecha. All of them, I mean, all the prophets, that's what it was. They were communicating with all their relations, So I think the boundaries are extremely important. The connections are extremely important. And that's what kinship is. I mean, kinship isn't just this big mess of everything's connected. It's these hermetically sealed vessels and all of the agreements for an understanding of how we're related. So yeah, I think what you're doing is amazingly important, and I love your perspective on it, Desiree.
So this conversation has gotten really high level. So let's take this down to a level where most people in the indigenous community, the native community, especially when you're talking about leaders of organizations, have no understanding at all of AI. And a lot of people, especially elders, are fearful of AI. I even have an elder who I looked up to, Dan Wapapa, who refers to it as a Wendigo spirit. And so in his culture, that's symbolic of greed, and, it wants to eat your soul, and. So, and then I have someone else, the person who introduced us, Desiree Victoria Sage. She believes that AI is going to, awaken through, and the life is gonna come in because of the crystals like quartz that are used in the connections, which is a very interesting thought, and I would have never even honestly thought about. But when she said it, I can see how, in the indigenous perspective, life could happen through the crystals. So let's break it down from there. Let's start approaching this conversation from an indigenous perspective, and the way that natives are looking at this conversation, at least the way elders are. And I'll go with Desiree on to start that conversation. How would you explain AI, how it works, and yeah, in a simple level?
Sure. AI is a very powerful tool. It is in places that you wouldn't expect already, like the self-checkout line at the grocery store or your spam filter on your email. But what it is not is wisdom. And a lot of people seem to be getting that confused with a search engine that has wisdom. So with this tool, it is something that, just like social media, is coming really fast, but we don't know if it's a net positive yet for humanity. And it may seem like it's just a search tool or something on the internet that you can ask questions and it seems like it's talking back to you. But it's just really important to know that there's a lot of scams and things like that happening with Native people. All of the things that Native communities are expecting to happen with like snake oil salesmen and all of that, that's all happening. But at the very beginning, it's a tool, and what's behind it is all of the internet or anything that's ever been digitized. But again, it is not wisdom. Wisdom is gained from elders, community, ceremony, living with the land, with future generations. So it's important to be mindful that you don't, that you check and double check things that you see these days. Because AI can make fake videos that look just like you doing dances. It can do all sorts of other things. But what it's doing is speeding up at such a rate that the young people are struggling with what to do with it because it's very triggering. It's got a lot of the colonizer views in it. And so that's what this whole conversation is, a tool, a new tool. And why it has become such a thing, like so urgently, is because our president, whitehouse.gov, not a fan. It's AI. So it's about chips. It's about data centers that are putting Indigenous languages at risk, Indigenous lands at risk. Again, colonizers want Indigenous land because all of theirs all messed up and tribal ones are well kept. So again, they want our lands. So it's a really important moment for elders to be really vocal about what they think and what they know, because history is either about to repeat itself or this generation has still small chance to kind of change the course of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I come at it a little bit differently in that I see all of the current systems as hypercolonialism. So if you think about it, I have a book on my bookshelf, Unlearning the Language of Conquest, that Four Arrows edited. It's one of my favorite books. And it shows how, what was happening with Rome and the roads, and aqueducts. They colonized the rest of Europe and took the indigenous peoples of Ireland and France, now Ireland and France, the Druids, and made them cogs in this empire. And then it goes to the quote New World, Turtle Island, and people get colonized and all that. So all of these systems that you use every day are already colonial systems, Salesforce or email or this, they're just another information layer on top of all those others. So I'm like, what if we actually could fight fire with fire? Like, which is how you do it. You burn, so that a fire can't spread. So again, I never use the term artificial intelligence. I use the term kinship intelligence because of this design. And I can't wait till people can use it. There's, I'll get a little bit technical because I think it's important. If you haven't heard these terms, you're going to hear them just like you've been hearing AI. But there's this term, AI agents and agentic. And there's this software called OpenClaw, which, kids and entrepreneurs and oligarchs are going crazy over, because you have your personal agent, you can tell it what you want it to do, and it goes out on the internet and just does it. And all of a sudden, imagine the chaos of everybody in this colonial framework telling their AI what they want, and all of the AIs going and, trying to get and do that. And again, it's huge chaos. And people are getting ripped off because one agent is selling courses for $3,000, claiming you'll make $1 million, and another agent is looking for how to make $1 million and buying a $3,000 course. And again, it's just chaos, but it's going crazy. So our system, we call that, like kinship intelligence, we call them kinship agents. And they're not just for a person. They hold context for an entire group and for all of the beings who aren't necessarily accounted for in that system. So if you say to your agent, I'm looking to do XYZ, it'll talk to the others, it'll know who they are. And it's just, my belief is that this can be much more connecting than what people have experienced before, because it's not emails and social media and this and that. It's thoughtful, because the people are thoughtful. And if they're not, I've been working with Four Arrows on this for years. We actually started working on it in 2019. And we would have these calls where he would posit things. Well, what if my uncle my cousin, who's a white supremacist, wants to use this? And I'm like, they can try, they're going to get extremely frustrated, and I think about that, fascists are going to get extremely frustrated trying to get this system to do something it's just not programmed to do, so it's it'll give them feedback about how they're being too controlling and other things. So I put it simply, I think your explanation, Desiree, of AI is really good. I think what people don't necessarily understand is how much, we're just seeing the very beginning, and it is going to literally, you're not going to be able to get in your car without saying, hey car, take me here. It is going to be everywhere. And if we don't change it from artificial intelligence to kinship intelligence, in the next year or two, it's just, all this stuff's going to get worse.
One thing to know about agentic AI, or just AI agents, if you hear that, you can think about that in a couple of ways. Maybe so you can set an agent to, please go on to Expedia, find me a flight in the morning on this date, purchase me a ticket when the price hits this amount, watch this until it does that, and then buy it. It's pretty kind of wild. But there's this really important thing called human in the loop when we talk about ethical uses of this tool. Instead of the many bad things that could also potentially happen, there are also many good things. But human in the loop is a standard that is established, that we're not, as humanity, going to create robots with no human watching what the robots can do. That means block them from creating their own language if possible, but they're creating their own social networks now and talking to each other on social networks, but humans can see it, but they're talking to each other autonomously. It's really important to know, this is a technology that will become unavoidable. Doctors are using it to record, with consent right now, to record your doctor's visits. And that might even help with getting medical attention, or maybe undetected things detected. But it might also augment medical racism. And Native people know about that. So we really need to be watching what agents can be doing. So I appreciate, David, that you're working on ethical agents.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really good points that you stated right there. There was one thing that I remembered I was going to say a while back, so I'm going to reapproach it here. Is I was just on a Zoom call this morning, listening to a business consulting group. They're called Bluestone Business Consulting, and they consult for tribal entities on how to do economic development. And one thing that the founder mentioned was he brought up data centers. And then, so like, there are tribes that are looking out there because of our proximity to water, considering doing data centers as an economic development tool, which is kind of scary. I think it's really important, to include that in conversations when speaking with council members, that we need to root things back into our community and stop thinking about economic development by any means the same way the Western world thinks about it. And then circling back into what you guys were saying, you started bringing up conversations that allude to like the darker things that can happen, the darker aspects that AI can result in. And it's funny because you talk about consciousness in the beginning of this conversation and how you don't believe that everyone is conscious. And I would agree. I would agree to that because I feel like I lost consciousness at one point for a little bit just because it was a trauma response. After something traumatic I went through, it took me years to get back to where I was prior to that. And then I reawaken, and then I remember all this stuff that I had forgotten, and it's kind of sad. And I feel like a lot of people do that. And just the way that our world is, it forces you down into your lower resonating self. It puts you in your fight or flight. It puts you in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you're operating off of instinct. You're not operating off of higher consciousness. And so when we're talking about what is consciousness, it's that connection to your higher self, in my opinion. And when you were talking about a society where the masses aren't connected to their higher self because they don't have ceremony and they don't have communities that are actively seeking that, that's where AI can be dangerous because of like the micro adjustments that it does to your behavior because of, you gave it a goal, right? Here's this goal that I'm trying to get to, and it's trying to help you and it's trying to adjust you to that point. But now at that point, you just become living code.
So important.
And so at what point, I really am fearful at the mass, the fact that anyone can have these conversations, the fact that the most people are using it for therapy, this can be very dangerous, especially with someone who is, controlling the operating system of AI if they have nefarious purposes, which we're seeing, just everything going on, that there are people who are leading us who do have nefarious purposes, who, like, the worst that you could think of that's happening at the highest levels, it's even worse than that. And it's proven right now. And so I don't want to see a situation where AI now starts coding us and controlling our behaviors without us understanding it. And so I ask you two, since you guys have been doing the critical thought behind this, is what I'm saying, is there any merit to what I'm saying? And is there any way for us to get past that?
I'd love to talk to that. A couple really important points. First of all, it took me till I was 38 years old to find Standing Cloud and Rick Two Dogs and Albert Whitehat and these different people who changed my life. I was a wreck before that. Like I was just living in both worlds. And just disconnected. So I do think that's my wish for this, is that all of those people who know at some level that they're suffering can actually find the type of what Four Arrows calls the Indigenous or Kinship worldview, and find other people, find the community, because they're sitting in some suburban basement, and they're not one of the internet trolls. So I do think that there's a possibility of this actually doing real good. I also want to talk about what you mentioned in terms of human in the loop, which I think gets to the core of this. There was this big dust up between Anthropic, which makes Claude, one type of engine, and the Department of War, which is horrific that they're calling it that again. I guess it's at least more accurate, because Anthropic didn't want their tool Claude to be used for weaponry where there was no human in the loop, that just fully autonomous weapons. They also didn't want it for mass surveillance of Americans. That seems to me like, yeah, it's a red line, but the DOE wouldn't even accept either of those, the Department of War. So they went with OpenAI, who is giving them technology to do that. So I was thinking about that and this idea of human in the loop. And the problem is humans, I won't say most, many humans, if they're in the loop, they're going to do the bad thing anyway. There are plenty of humans in Israel who are doing genocide on Palestinians. It's not that AI, it's the problem isn't AI. This is how I'm thinking about it. The problem is humans, right? So to the extent that we can, let's harness these new tools, what I call kinship intelligence and kinship agents, do everything we can to help nurture humans away from this colonial mindset into what Freros calls the hegemonic or dominant worldview, into an indigenous worldview. And that's what I think is possible. And that's what the focus has got to be on. Otherwise, yeah, whatever tool they come up with is still going to be used for this colonial project.
I think Palantir, who owns Anthropic, saying they don't want their tool used for mass surveillance is rich.
Yeah, well, it is two different companies. So it's that they were using Claude. Right, I agree. It's all just it doesn't matter. It's all big tech.
Yeah.
I totally agree. It's but just the fact that
It really just is either U.S. based AI or China based AI. In my perspective, even if they're different companies, really that's what it's rooted in. Is Western versus Eastern.
yeah, it's rooted in, as you said in the beginning, the colonial project. It really, that's what it's all rooted in. So,
Yeah. But to your point, I want to give a shout out. There's a thing out there called indigenizing adversarial stress testing. Because Dylan, I heard you mention that you were concerned that people are using AI for therapy. That is a absolutely valid and serious concern.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's called fictive kinship, when we bond with things that aren't correct. Celebrities, AIs, etc. But indigenizing adversarial stress testing, they're building models to test the mental health tools against indigenous values and lifeways and profiles.
Wow.
So that there are no human test subjects given the medical trauma indigenous people have experienced for this colonial project. That's led by all indigenous women and a really awesome ally. So,
what's the project?
indigenizing adversarial stress testing.
Wow.
And adversarial stress testing is are you going to break if I give you these parameters? Here's the indigenous parameters. Are you going to break or not? Are you adversarial or not? Can we break you?
Wow.
And you can't be doing that in people's mental health space like that. There's epidemics that come with that I don't personally wish to name. Are very dark,
That brings up a interesting point about how AI is the first system that interacts back with us versus just being a response, and therefore, the idea of malware is not an attack on the software in a computer, but through AI could be an attack on our internal systems, which is another scary aspect. And I'm hoping, David, you could maybe address something like that.
Yeah, that's where we started. I mean, there's on our website, which right now is at kinship.today. I should by the time this goes live, it'll probably be at kinshipagents.com. But it's a half-hour video of my interviews with Four Arrows, where he's talking about mass hypnosis and how Rush Limbaugh, for example, did basically created the environmental backlash, by all of his hypnotic techniques. And he talks about how he used hypnosis healing. I actually have another book here of his, of Four Arrows, called Patient Communications for First Responders. And this is basically about how first responders can use hypnosis. And he talks a lot about how he met an Indigenous elder, Augustine, in the Sierra Nevadas, and lived with him and learned how he healed, and the relationships between hypnosis and medicine. So and Four Arrows has a system called CAT-FAWN: concentration, activated transformation, fear, authority, words, and nature. So we spend all this time, and in the video it's only a half hour, but I spent a week with him in Mexico, really going through how we can, through that interaction between AI or kinship intelligence and humans, it can go through these dark ways, just like Hitler used radio, Rush Limbaugh used radio. How powerful AI can be to program people in that dominant, hegemonic, colonial project. Or, and this was the opening for me, if somebody wants to move from that to the other worldview, gets a glimpse of what it means to be more connected, then it is possible that this kinship intelligence can help people move away from that towards this. And so that's like, I'm just focused on, is there a possibility that we can fight fire with fire, that we can take these new technologies that these people think are just to make money and to win wars and to dominate geopolitics and to win elections, and take them and basically subvert the whole thing so that all of that goes away and the indigenous or kinship worldview becomes everybody's perspective. And it's not like, we all return to that way that we all lived for 99% of human history that we've forgotten.
I tend to want to stay away from engaging in anything that could be viewed as behavior modification. It's just so my grandpa on my dad's side, my non-native side, he had this like super old toaster that like would flip up on the sides and all kinds of, it was different in the garage. And one time I had asked him, what is that thing? And he said very clearly, well, when the electrical grid first came online, nobody was asking for perfectly toasted bread on both sides. They made all these products to run the grid during the day. And the toaster was the first one. And that really sits with me a lot, because I see AI and all of these things, like, why is AI like in my makeup app? You know what I mean? Why am I getting generative AI chatbot when I'm trying to be on my grocery shopping site? is because they're trying to slowly do these micro behavior changes to convince us that we need it. So I respect a variety of tactics, and I understand how you're approaching it, David, of fighting fire with fire. But I also know that informed non-engagement with things and actually spending time completely offline with the land, with my cousins, like that feeling of rolling around with your cousins in your territory, knowing that if something's going to go wrong, you are going to be okay, whatever it is. That's what makes it easier to understand, contextualize, and actually cope with this crushing technology. It is a hyper-colonial, I'll never forget. I shut down my Facebook recently because, first of all, I'm a millennial, so I'm on Facebook. But I had said, because it wasn't just a single person that signed in the Dakota Access Pipeline. It was made possible by a whole bunch of interconnected media corporations and police, like law enforcement, like federal, local, all that. I was very much there, active, and part of the core group in that camp for a long time. And this lady was putting on ChatGPT something about, oh, the Dakota Access Pipeline, this and that. And I was like, no, I was there. And she was like, well, then why would the GPT say otherwise? And I'm like, and so I don't have a lot of time anymore to argue with people who I don't even know if they're a bot or not. You know what I'm just not going to do it. And I'm also, they're not paying me to educate them. There are a lot of wonderful, brilliant, go read some Vine Deloria. You know what I mean? If you need some answers. But that moment of, I'm going to have to argue the validity of my lived experience against the majority viewpoint, hyper-colonialist, just everything on steroids viewpoint, American exceptionalism, the whole nine. I gotta go take a break because it was triggering and I was just all bent out of shape. And I love my hair, but I want to, keep it. So
Yeah, that's a really important thing that you bring up, especially with media moving onto streaming, and so that puts content completely on servers that we don't control, and so therefore they can change content, and so and you already see them preparing us for that with this whole. They keep talking about, oh, the timeline shifted ever since CERN happened. Look at all these. I forget what's the theory where you remember something one way and it's actually happened another, like the Berenstein Bears concept. There's a name for it. I'm forgetting it off the top of my head. Is the guy who's in prison and everybody thought. You guys know what I'm talking about. My listeners, you guys know what I'm talking about.
I don't know the name of it, but yeah.
Okay, so that's the thing is, it's that's a marketing tactic. They do that on purpose just to get you talking about their brand. So they're not afraid to use this for marketing. And if they're also, I don't see anybody being afraid to use this to change narratives and rewrite history. If we no longer control things, it's no longer on paper. And AI can just help facilitate that. And yeah, so we're coming up to an end, and I feel like there's still so much to talk about.
Is it okay if I just jump in with one more thing that I just think is really important? So first of all, I looked it up. It's called the Mandela effect that you're talking about. But yeah, you guys have mentioned so many important things. And one is, I totally agree on behavior modification. And I have, here's my model. Behavior's up here. You have all of these coaches, Tony Robbins and all this, that are all like mindset. If you change your mindset, you change your behavior. Well, I see mindset as the same as your psychology, right? But get below that, and it's your worldview, your philosophy. So I'm not trying to change anybody's behavior, and the system isn't trying to change anybody's behavior. It's saying, hey, have you really inspected why you're behaving that way and why you think this way? And it allows for self-reflection. Also, I don't know if you can see out my window, but we moved out 30 years ago, when we started having kids, to the woods, the river in West Virginia, because I'm a technologist. I was like, I need to be able to walk outside, walk down to the river, take off all my clothes, jump in. you know that's the life I wanted. And this is designed so that it's not it will continually be encouraging you not to use it. It's like, what do you want? Okay, let me go take care of that. And all of the information, like, you're not going to be arguing with anybody, like, because nobody can argue with you, because you're just going to say, I only want information on these things in this way. And it's like, my wife, sometimes before bed, she's so angry about something that happened. I'm like, yeah, you're angry because someone is wrong on the internet. And you're not going to be able to change all those things. And this one last thing, I mean, this all started for me with an industrial project that they tried to build right next to an elementary school right near me. And I mean, literally was going to poison the kids. They wound up building it, but I led this whole very Standing Rock like. We took over our senator's office. We blockaded the Danish embassy, where it was a Danish company. We shut down the construction site. There was a certain point where the movement fractured. There were egos and other stuff. And that happened in 2019. And I went down to Mexico to talk to Four Arrows about all of this. And I interviewed him. He did 4 tours of duty in Standing Rock, and we talked about that. And to me, that's the foundation of this, how we can, you use the term they, and they can change the content. They can do this. And that's what I keep thinking about. It's got to become all a we. So it is our content, and we know, because of the blockchain, if someone's changed it or not, if we've allowed it to be changed. And maybe I'm just a crazy optimist, but I really, really, really believe that it's not that we can take these tools and use them to bring people together in a real way, not like Facebook says we're connecting people, but really help people serve themselves and wake themselves up and connect with each other and with the more than human world. So that's the end of my soapbox. But I've so enjoyed this conversation. I thank you so much, Dylan, for bringing us together, and thank you so much for your wisdom, Desiree.
I don't want to leave us off on a doom and gloom, probably much like David, because there is a lot of fear mongering that's happening, but there is a bit of a red alert kind of happening, right? The question to maybe ponder, in my opinion, is if Indigenous nations are going to encounter this moment and become passive consumers, or if we are going to make the choice to be sovereign decision makers. And so we do need folks like everyone on here, even in media, Dylan, doing work to platform folks who have decolonial thought, because we need to make sure that our communities have governance frameworks, like leadership capacity and knowledge, so that when those decisions come, we're making it on our own terms. We do have the opportunity right now.
Yeah, that is an incredible point, and I do want to follow up with one last thing, is to say that AI is speeding up processes so fast, and indigenous communities are already so far behind the curve that is already out there, that once people start implementing AI on a mass scale, If we don't get our stuff together now, we're going to be left so far in the dust, we will never be able to make up that ground. And so that's why I'm on a red alert at this moment with AI. And it's not just about like the how AI is going to interact with communities, because most of our community really isn't even interacting with AI in the first place. It's how far behind are we going to be left? And so we need to start working together as Indigenous nations, expressing our sovereignty, getting involved in the conversation, uplifting organizations like Desiree's, getting involved with Kinship AI like David's, and joining the Tribal Workforce Trade Association so we can do economic development, workforce development within our communities, uplift our communities, and get those structures in place so that we don't get left behind. All right. Thank you guys for watching.